Good morning, all. Thanks, Ron and Rachel, for organizing all this. Thanks, Kate, for a great introductory talk here. 9 years ago today, in my 50th year of life, I returned from the Santiago de Compostela to my part-time home in Madrid. I had just completed the 750 kilometers of the Camino Frances version of the Camino de Santiago across the northern Iberian Peninsula. It took 30 days to traverse in the middle of winter, averaging 25 kilometers or 15 miles a day, with a sabbatical day of rest once a week. What I share today here interjects my own personal journey with issues of agency, the arts, religion, and creation. I've long been interested in the journey, from teenage years backpacking through sections of the Pacific Crest Trail and the Sierra Nevadas of California, to global travels to more recent gender transitions. In these times and spaces, I have stumbled upon seemingly serendipitous instances in which the soul, S-O-U-L, meets the soul, S-O-L-E. Excuse the pun there. Mind and body weave and fuse in creative ways as the imagination often overpours with expression. I want to discuss these entanglements by giving examples of found art along the Camino as ways to enmesh the arts, the body, the soul, and the journey. When peregrinos, those term for the names of people on the Camino, walk, ride, move across the mountains, rivers, and plains of Spain, our bodies change, and this bodily change provokes new ideas, feelings, and behaviors. People who are not artists create. People who regularly say, "I don't understand art," find themselves leaving imaginative objects and new assemblages along the way. While it's beyond the scope of my presentation, I do want to preface here, especially here at the start of our day, the probability that pilgrimage is a deep-seated element of the evolution of Homo sapiens. A few years ago, I began research around the rise of bipedalism in hominids, the points at which early humans stood up on 2 feet as their primary means of transportation, and how rituals like pilgrimage and dance seem to have arisen early in modern human existence. Which is also, to put it bluntly, a way to think about the co-creative evolutionary forces of the anatomical human body, the journey and creative activities. Which I think is also possibly to turn around Edith Turner's note about pilgrimage embodying religion. That sort of presumes religion comes first and pilgrimage is after. The walking came first, and then we began to attach significance to the walking, and then we created religion out of that, I think, is the evolutionary view. Religion is not primary to our embodiment. Our embodiment is primary to religion. Of course, central to all these threads, whether it is dance or gender or ritual or art, is, of course, the body, and we can't understand anything about religion unless we do begin with the body. As I suggested in a previous essay a few years ago, said the body acts as it is acted upon, and over eons of evolutionary history, its anatomical structures have been honed to fit differing ecological spaces. The world-making body is always already part of a technical nexus of objects great and small, from handheld prayer beads to grand mosques, to the mountains and islands and plains that populations of people alter so as to better inhabit. The active sensing body is a body in relation to other bodies, of flesh and blood, as well as water and rock, in relation to special things. Art and religion each operate through bodily, sense-based activities with material things that stimulate feeling, thinking, and belonging, just as they can each stimulate isolation and challenge perceived views of the world. Through the bodily-based senses, the arts provoke the imagination and eventually give rise to thinking and, at some later point, believing. We humans create, sometimes with our own bodies, and oftentimes with found objects. In here, I think I can turn this on if it doesn't automatically go. Wasn't supposed to do an automatic. Yeah, hold on a second, I'm gonna go back. All right, I'll pause that there then. So we create sometimes with our own bodies and oftentimes with simple found objects that are collected on the way. Some go to Los Alamos and buy t-shirts. As Catherine Bruce suggests, an essential part of pilgrimage is bringing home a token of the place, Such objects serve both as proof that the pilgrim has visited the place and as a physical manifestation of the spirit. Others create makeshift public altars. After the collapse of the World Trade Towers in New York City in 2001, people left their t-shirts. I don't know why this is just advancing automatically. I'm going to let it go for now. Here, people left their t-shirts rather than purchase their t-shirts, alongside stuffed animals, flowers, and posters at St. Paul's Chapel in Lower Manhattan. People from around the world made pilgrimage to the site of Ground Zero and somehow almost instinctively wanted to create something in the absence. Likewise, peregrinos find and redistribute stones and pieces of wood, ribbons and papers, sending out prayers as those found objects are resettled in new places with new purposes. Catherine and I didn't talk about this, but I think there's a lot of overlap already with these. Here I'll weave in some stories of these found objects, mixed with my own instances of the more established art, told through some of the reflective pieces from my own Camino, my own works of art. I'm just going to let these slides go. 30 days on the Camino. Day 1. A sleepy little monastery nestled in the Pyrenees is home for now. The start of a year, the start of a pilgrimage. I sit alone in a 13th century church with its concrete floors, straining to kneel, as the wind batters the stained glass and the sun pushes faded blues across the altar. The space is cold and cozy at once. The 800-year-old Virgin of Roncesvalles sits atop it all. Her silver coating has not, I presume, kept her from seeing much in her centuries of life, though I understand she was kept hidden behind a curtain for the first 600 years, only accessible to pilgrims and only after a special ceremony. Secrecy, mystery, and transitions all bound together. Day 7 begins with a quote from the singer-songwriter John Denver, and talk of poems and prayers and promises and things that we believe in. Some of you are not old enough to get this reference. One can't get through a day in the Camino without coming across a shrine, marker, mound of stuff created by God knows how many people. Sticks and stones and piles, paper and ribbons and trees, spray paint and tunnels and etchings in steel. Since the Stone Age, we Homo sapiens have been leaving things around. Sometimes we're just lazy and don't clean up after ourselves, though often we have good reason to be unkempt, as my children often argue. Religiously speaking, this is all part of the long-standing practice of votive offerings, of leaving something as a marker for prayer, petition, and praise, usually at a special place where the supernatural beings might take notice. On the Camino, the supernatural and natural mix. It's the same shrine for all the gods and no gods. These are the votives, the prayers of the often unaffiliated pilgrims. Today, I left a striking white stone on top of another stone, sending my prayerful energy through the earth to my family back home. These are the things we believe in. Along the Camino are shrines, day 20. Along the Camino are shrines for pilgrims who have died on the way. Rosanna di Verona died in 2006 near Esterobar. Shingo Yamashita died in 2002 near Zubiri. Arnie Skov Schmidt died in 2011 outside Estella. These are only a few from the last 2 decades, those whose shrines still stand. 1,200 years of the Camino have witnessed thousands of pilgrims dying on the way, and monasteries and churches and cemeteries across the path are filled with the fallen. For so many, the Camino de Santiago has been a self-conscious final trip, a raged walking against the dying light. Even knowing this, I can't help but feel a slight anguish on their behalf for not making it to the Santiago de Compostela, to bring dying prayers to St. James's presence, to overcome whatever obstacles in their way, or to simply say, I did it. But I'm pretty sure, too, for many, they would have rather died on the way than at home. Now the shrines serve as memento mori, reminding us present pilgrims not to take this too lightly, to know there are perils and that all ways inevitably lead to our deaths. The old man and young woman, Korean and Australian, Swahili-speaking and Braille reading, transgendered and heterosexual, death undoes us all. Day 30. Here are some true stories from people I've met along the Camino. A Korean man who turned 60 this year. In Chinese and Korean cultures, 60 marks the completion of a life cycle, and so he is doing the Camino as part of his new life. A Brazilian family who carry huge backpacks because they wanted to make their own food throughout the trip. A Czech man who had his farm foreclosed and so set off walking from the Czech Republic. When he got to Paris, he found a stray dog and took him in, and now together, dog and man are close to reaching Santiago. There was the Norwegian who was so proud of not having internet access for 2 weeks and being so disconnected that he then proceeded to talk politics and sports for the next hour to whoever would listen. David went somewhere off the grid several years ago in a remote farmland along the Camino, while Susie walked by years later heading for Santiago, but to this day never made it further than David's makeshift hut. It is winter break for university students around the world. Nowhere is this more important than Korea, South Korea, I should say, where the break means a month to fly across the world and go on the Camino before heading back to class in the spring, maybe finding a new love interest along the way. Jose lost his wife a few years ago. Since then, he's been walking, Lourdes, Rome, Santiago, Lisboa, and back and forth, living off the kindness of strangers, hospitaleros, and whoever offers an extra coin or cigarette. Nobody's quite sure what happened to the lady with the wild hair, the constantly dangling cigarette, the unkempt clothes, who somehow keeps walking. Day 32. The pilgrim is a sensual being. For centuries, pilgrims arriving in the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela would touch the carved marble tree of Jesse before filing in to embrace the carving of St. James. Meanwhile, the grand image of the cathedral soars in our visions, and the great Botafumeiro, an 80-kilogram gold censer, swings its incense smoke across the transept. The end of the road is a grand sensual feast. But all along the way, we undertake sensual encounters. Today, I felt mossy stones under my fingers and slippery stones under my feet, smelled pine groves and cow manure, tasted bread and cheese, listened to morning songs of birds, so many birds, and the trickles of creeks, saw carefully constructed stone walls and stone crosses. None of this is unusual or particular to the pilgrim alone. In fact, everyday life is filled with such sense encounters. The difference is that for the pilgrim, there is more attention given to the senses, more of the brain's synapses devoted to apprehending and appreciating the sensual encounters. As with meditation or prayer, there's a heightened sensual awareness, and pilgrims throughout time have noticed such experiences, which all makes me wonder whether walking the way is anti-metaphorical. In the midst of a modern world that strongly believes in language and metaphors of the journey of life abound, the actual pilgrimage is a wake-up call to the senses. In its intense sensual bodily basis, pilgrimage implies a radical break from metaphor, reestablishing the ground of our being, not in words, but in nudges and noses, flavors and forms, or so say my words. Conclusion. When I completed the Camino 9 years ago, I drew up my notes and compiled them in a little ebook that I titled By the Way, available at Amazon for $2.99. I used the title By the Way for a couple reasons. First, of course, it signaled my travel on the way, just as the way has resonances across religious traditions, and I've written some on the interreligious dimensions of the Camino elsewhere. By the way is also meant to trigger a sense of the serendipitous. When we say, oh, by the way, we mean something incidental, as if it were a side dish to the real meat of the conversation. As I've talked with people throughout my life, from old friends to new acquaintances, I found that these asides, these little anecdotes, are some of the richest morsels of our relationships, just as the found object might be some of the richest pieces of art. But it takes an attentiveness to understand their importance. These are the times we need to listen the most, to look the keenest. This is where the muse might often find us, offering glimpses of a life beginning to be put together, soul to soul. Thank you.